The hospital breathed with exhaustion. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across scuffed linoleum floors. It was the kind of place where hope and despair lived side by side, separated only by thin curtains and thinner prayers. Nia Carter stood at the nurse's station, her feet aching in shoes worn thin from 12-hour shifts. She'd been awake for 16 hours straight, covering for a colleague who'd called in sick. Again. Her scrubs carried the faint smell of antiseptic and coffee, and her braids, once neat that morning, now pulled loose around her temples. She was 26 years old, working in a city hospital where the patients were many and the staff were few. Where budgets were tight and compassion was sometimes the only medicine they had enough of. Just as she finished charting her last patient's vitals, the code alert echoed through the corridor. Sharp, insistent, demanding. Room 347. Mr. Alden Pierce. Nia's shoulders sagged. Other nurses turned away, suddenly busy with paperwork. Everyone knew about Mr. Pierce. Difficult, demanding, mean-spirited. The kind of patient who made your shift feel twice as long. But someone had to go. Nia grabbed the emergency kit and walked toward his room, her tired feet carrying her toward a moment that would change everything. Room 347 was dim, curtains drawn against the evening light. The air felt heavy, thick with the smell of illness and loneliness. Medical equipment beeped steadily, marking time in mechanical rhythm. Mr. Alden Pierce lay in the hospital bed, his frail body barely making an impression beneath white sheets. He was 83 years old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles that spoke of years spent frowning more than smiling. His hair, still thick but silver-white, stuck up at odd angles. His hands, spotted with age and 4 bruises, trembled against the blanket. When Nia entered, his eyes found hers immediately. They were pale blue, watery, and filled with something she recognized too well. Fear. "Please," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't leave me alone. Not tonight." The words stopped Nia mid-step. This wasn't the sharp-tongued patient other nurses complained about. This was just an old man, terrified, reaching out in the only way he knew how. She moved to his bedside, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Mr. Pierce, I'm here. You're okay. What do you need?" His trembling hand reached for hers, fingers cold and desperate. "Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves." Nia gently squeezed his hand, feeling the paper-thin skin, the bones beneath. "I'm not going anywhere right now." The dinner tray sat untouched on the rolling table, plastic-wrapped and growing cold. Hospital food, unappetizing at the best of times, looked even less appealing now. Soup, some kind of sandwich, applesauce in a small container. Nia glanced at the chart. Mr. Pierce hadn't eaten all day. The day before either, according to the notes. He was losing weight fast, his body consuming itself. "Mr. Pierce, you need to eat something," she said gently, unwrapping the soup. Steam rose from the bowl, carrying the bland scent of chicken broth. "What's the point?" His voice was bitter. "I'm dying anyway." "Maybe," Nia said, pulling a chair close to his bed. "But not tonight. And tonight, you need soup." She filled the spoon carefully, holding it steady despite her own shaking hands. 12 hours on her feet, muscles screaming for rest, but she held that spoon like it was the most important thing in the world. Alden watched her with those watery eyes, confusion crossing his face. Why was she doing this? Why wasn't she rushing away like the others? "Why do you care?" he whispered as she brought the spoon to his lips. Nia paused, the question hanging between them. She thought about her grandmother, who'd taught her that caring wasn't something you did when it was convenient. It was something you did because you were human. "Because you're here," she said simply. "And so am I." After the soup, Nia noticed the visitor board on the wall. Every patient had one, a whiteboard where families wrote messages, drew hearts, left reminders of love. "Get well soon, Grandpa." "We love you, Mom." "Praying for you." Mr. Pierce's board was empty. Completely blank except for his name written in clinical black marker. No messages. No flowers on the windowsill. No cards taped to the walls. Just medical equipment and institutional beige. "No visitors today?" Nia asked, already knowing the answer. Alden's jaw tightened. "No visitors any day." Family coming by later. A sound escaped him, something between a laugh and a sob. My children are in the city. 20 minutes away. They know I'm here. He turned his face toward the window, though the curtains blocked any view. They're waiting for me to die so they can fight over what I leave behind. The words hit Nia like cold water. She'd seen absent families before, but something about the way he said it, the complete resignation in his voice, made her chest ache. A nurse poked her head in, saw Nia, and quickly said, "His son and daughter have been calling, asking about his status. They won't come in, though. Say they're too busy." The door closed, leaving Nia alone with an old man who had everything except what mattered. Over the next hour, Alden began to talk. Slowly at first, words dragged from somewhere deep and painful. Then more freely, as if a dam had broken. He spoke about his past. About building a real estate empire from nothing. About working 18-hour days, missing birthdays, missing graduations, missing everything that couldn't be scheduled in a boardroom. "I thought providing for them was the same as loving them," he said, his voice cracking. "Big house. Best schools. Everything money could buy." He coughed, a wet rattling sound. "But I never showed up. Not really. I was always at the office, always closing another deal, always planning the next acquisition." Nia listened without judgment, occasionally adjusting his pillows, checking his oxygen levels. "My wife, Eleanor, she tried to tell me. Tried to make me see what I was losing. But I didn't listen." His eyes grew distant. "She died 8 years ago. Cancer. And even then, even at the end, I was thinking about business. About what would happen to the company." His hand found Nia's again, gripping with surprising strength. "My children learned to need my money, not me. And now that's all they want." Then his body convulsed. Blood appeared on his lips, bright red against pale skin. Nia hit the call button, her voice sharp and professional. "I need a doctor in 347. Now." The doctors stabilized him, adjusted medications, warned about declining kidney function. They spoke in careful terms about making him comfortable and end-of-life planning. Nia was charting the new orders when they arrived. Alden's children. Richard and Victoria Pierce. Richard was 52, dressed in an expensive suit even at 8 in the evening, phone already pressed to his ear. Victoria was 49, designer handbag, perfectly styled hair, a mouth set in permanent disapproval. They didn't go to their father's bedside immediately. Instead, they cornered the attending physician in the hallway. "How much longer?" Richard asked bluntly. "We need to know for estate planning purposes." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "That's not really something we can predict with." "Best guess," Victoria interrupted. "Days. Weeks. We need to contact lawyers, arrange for property transfers, notify the board. There are procedures." Through the open door, Nia could see Alden lying in his bed, listening. His face held no surprise, only a deep, bottomless sadness. "Maybe you should talk to your father," the doctor suggested gently. "We're here, aren't we?" Victoria snapped. "What more does he want?" They finally entered his room, but not to comfort him. Richard immediately began asking about bank account numbers. Victoria wanted to know about safety deposit boxes. Neither of them touched him. Neither asked how he felt. Nia watched this cold transaction with growing anger. She saw Alden's hands tremble, saw his eyes search his children's faces for something, anything, that looked like love. They found nothing. When Richard began raising his voice about some property dispute, Nia stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but firm. "This is a hospital room. If you can't lower your voices, I'll have to ask you to leave." Victoria turned on her, eyes sharp. "Excuse me. Who are you?" "His nurse." "Just a nurse," Victoria sneered. "This is a family matter. You have no business interfering. This is a patient care matter. And right now, you're disturbing my patient." Richard looked at her like she was something unpleasant on his shoe. "Do you know who we are? One complaint and you'll be looking for a new job." But before Nia could respond, a sound stopped them all. Quiet, broken, barely audible. Alden was crying. Silent tears tracked down his weathered cheeks, catching in the hollows of his face. His children saw it and looked away, uncomfortable. Nia moved to his side immediately, gently wiping his face with a tissue. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay." Richard and Victoria left shortly after, their business unfinished but their discomfort complete. Neither said goodbye to their father. Nia's shift ended at 9. She clocked out, gathered her things, and walked toward the exit. Rain hammered against the hospital windows, turning the city beyond into a blur of lights and motion. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. She had a 40-minute bus ride home to a small apartment she shared with 2 roommates. Tomorrow she'd be back at 6 for another 12-hour shift. But as she reached the door, something stopped her. A memory. Her grandmother's voice, from years ago when Nia was young and impatient. "Baby girl, kindness isn't convenient. It comes at the worst times, demands the most from you. But that's when it matters most." Nia stood in the lobby, rain-soaked night on one side, fluorescent-lit corridors on the other. She thought about Alden alone in room 347. Alone with his tears and his regrets and his fear. He shouldn't be alone, she whispered to herself. The decision made itself. Nia turned away from the door, from the rain, from rest. She walked back through the hospital, her coat still on, her bag still over her shoulder, back toward room 347. When she pushed open the door, Alden's eyes found hers. Surprise flickered there, then something else. Something that looked like hope. "You came back," he breathed. Nia settled into the chair beside his bed, still wearing her coat. The hospital had grown quiet, entering that strange twilight zone of night shift. Fewer voices, dimmer lights, everything moving slower. The dinner tray remained, barely touched. Nia uncovered it again, found the food cold but edible. She began the slow process of feeding him, spoonful by careful spoonful. Alden ate more this time, perhaps because Nia was there, perhaps because some small part of him wanted to hold on a little longer. "You remind me of someone," he said between bites. "Someone good." "Who?" Nia asked gently. "A nurse. Long time ago. When Eleanor was sick, there was this one nurse who showed kindness when everyone else just saw a patient number. She'd stay late, read to Eleanor, hold her hand." His eyes grew distant. "I never thanked her properly. Never told her what it meant that she treated my wife like a person, not just a case." He looked at Nia with sudden clarity. "You're like her. You see people." Nia felt her throat tighten. "Your wife was lucky to have you there." "Was I there, though?" Alden's voice turned bitter. "Really there? Or was I just occupying space, already thinking about what came next?" Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken regrets. Then Alden reached for her hand. "Stay," he whispered. "Just a little longer. Please." Around midnight, Alden's breathing changed. Became shallower, more labored. Nia checked his vitals, adjusted his oxygen, but knew what she was seeing. The body beginning its final surrender. "Nia," his voice was barely audible. "Can you do something for me?" "Of course. Paper. Pen. Please." She found a notepad and pen in his bedside drawer. But when she placed them in his hands, his fingers shook too badly to grip the pen. 3 times it slipped from his grasp, each time bringing fresh frustration to his face. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't even write anymore." "Tell me what you want to say," Nia offered. "I'll write it for you." Relief flooded his features. "It's for my lawyer. There are things that need to be said. Things that need to be done." For the next hour, Alden dictated. Slowly, with many pauses for breath. He spoke of regrets, of time wasted chasing money instead of building relationships. He apologized for being a distant father, an absent husband. He acknowledged the pain he'd caused. Then his words shifted to something else. Something that made Nia's hand pause mid-sentence. "There's something I saw in you," he said. "Something the world needs to see. Kindness without expectation. Care without calculation. That deserves to be recognized. Mr. Pierce, I'm just doing my job." "No." His grip tightened. "You're doing more. You're being human." Nia called the number Alden gave her. A lawyer answered despite the late hour, arrived within 30 minutes with documents and a notary. They worked quickly, professionally, as Alden's breathing grew more labored. The lawyer explained procedures, rights, legality. Alden signed where he could, his signature a trembling scrawl. When his hand gave out completely, he made his mark, properly witnessed. "This is legally binding," the lawyer confirmed. "The previous will is superseded." After they left, Nia stayed. She held Alden's hand as his heart monitor began showing irregular rhythms. Watched his chest rise and fall with increasing difficulty. "Nia," he whispered around 3 in the morning. "Thank you." "For what?" "For feeding me when no one else would. For seeing me as a person, not just a dying old man. For staying when you didn't have to." His eyes found hers, lucid despite the pain. "You gave me dignity in my final days. That's worth more than any fortune." His monitor beeped erratically. Nia hit the call button, but she didn't let go of his hand. "I'm here," she promised. "You're not alone." Alden smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "I know," he breathed. "I know." His last breath left him at 3:47 a.m., with Nia's hand in his, her quiet tears falling on their joined hands. The hospital followed its protocols. Time of death recorded. Doctor notified. Family contacted. Alden's body prepared for the morgue, his belongings bagged and tagged. Nia finished her documentation with trembling hands, her eyes burning with exhaustion and grief. She'd lost patients before, but this felt different. Personal. Richard and Victoria arrived by mid-morning, dry-eyed and businesslike. They swept through their father's room, collecting valuables, checking for anything worth keeping. Then Victoria turned on Nia, who was finishing her shift. "You," she said coldly. "You were with him when he died." "Yes." "Alone with him?" "I was caring for him." Richard stepped closer, voice low and threatening. "We know your type. Preying on vulnerable elderly patients, manipulating them for financial gain. Our father was medicated, confused. Whatever he might have said or promised you means nothing." Nia's blood ran cold. "I didn't ask for anything. I was just being a nurse." "We're filing a complaint with the hospital," Victoria announced. "And we're demanding an investigation into your conduct. If we find you influenced our father in any way, we'll press charges." They left, their threats hanging in the air like poison. Nia's supervisor called her into the office that afternoon, face grave. "We need to take this seriously. Until the investigation is complete, you're on administrative leave." 3 days passed in a blur of anxiety. Nia sat in her small apartment, replaying every conversation with Alden, wondering what she could have done differently. The hospital's investigation interview had been professional but thorough. Had she overstepped boundaries? Had she behaved inappropriately? She knew she hadn't. But that didn't stop the fear. On the 4th day, a call came to the hospital. A lawyer, asking for the nurse who stayed with Mr. Alden Pierce on the night of his passing. Nia's supervisor brought her back to the hospital, face unreadable. "Someone wants to speak with you." In a small conference room, a man in his 60s waited. Distinguished, wearing an expensive suit but with kind eyes. He introduced himself as Thomas Whitmore, Alden Pierce's attorney for 40 years. "Miss Carter," he said, "I need to verify some information. Were you with Mr. Pierce on the night he died?" "Yes," her voice barely steady. "Did he dictate a message to you, which you wrote down?" "Yes." "He wanted to say things he couldn't write himself." Thomas nodded slowly. "That matches what I witnessed that night. Miss Carter, you're not in trouble. Quite the opposite." He opened his briefcase, pulled out sealed documents. "Mr. Pierce left something. Something unexpected." Nia's hands went cold. "What do you mean?" "He updated his will the night you stayed with him. And you're mentioned in it." Thomas arranged a formal reading of the will. Richard and Victoria arrived with their own lawyers, faces tight with anger. The hospital administrator attended as well, along with Nia's supervisor. The conference room felt too small, tension pressing against every wall. "This is highly irregular," Richard's lawyer began. "A last minute will change, influenced by hospital staff." was properly witnessed, notarized, and executed according to New York state law, Thomas interrupted smoothly. Mr. Pierce was of sound mind, as verified by his attending physician. The will is legally binding. Victoria leaned forward, voice venomous. If that nurse manipulated my father. Let's watch the video, Thomas said calmly. Before anyone makes accusations. He pressed play on a laptop. The screen filled with Alden's face, filmed in his hospital room the night Nia stayed. His voice was weak but clear, his eyes lucid. My name is Alden James Pierce, he began. I'm recording this of my own free will, in the presence of my attorney and a notary public. What I'm about to say supersedes my previous will. The room went silent. Nia felt her heart hammering. Alden continued, I'm making these changes because of something I witnessed in my final days. Something that reminded me what really matters in this world. On the screen, Alden shifted slightly, his hospital gown rustling. Behind him, medical equipment blinked and beeped, marking time. For the past 3 days, he said, I've been lying in this room, dying. My children have called multiple times. To check on my assets. To ask about property transfers. To ensure their inheritances are secure. His voice hardened. Not once did they ask how I was feeling. Not once did they visit, except to discuss money. Richard and Victoria sat frozen, faces pale. Last night, Alden continued, I overheard them in the hallway. Didn't know I could hear. Richard said, and I quote, How much longer is the old man going to drag this out? We have estate planners waiting. His eyes grew wet. Victoria laughed. Said, At least when he's gone, we won't have to pretend to care anymore. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Nia saw Victoria's hand fly to her mouth, saw Richard's face drain of color. So I made a decision, Alden said from the screen. About who deserves what I've built. About who showed me kindness when kindness was all that mattered. He paused, gathering strength. There's a nurse here. Nia Carter. She stayed after her shift ended. Fed me when I couldn't feed myself. Held my hand when I was scared. Treated me like a human being, not an asset. Alden's recorded voice grew stronger, more certain. Nia Carter never asked for anything. Never suggested she wanted anything. She simply cared. He looked directly at the camera. That's rare. Precious. And it deserves to be recognized. Thomas paused the video, pulled out formal documents. The specific provisions are as follows. To Richard and Victoria Pierce, Mr. Pierce leaves the sum of $50,000 each. To be used, and I quote, for therapy to learn how to be human. Gasps filled the room. Richard shot to his feet. 50,000. That's nothing. The estate is worth millions. Please sit down, Thomas said calmly. To Nia Carter, Mr. Pierce leaves the following. His private lakeside property in Saratoga Springs, valued at $2.3 million. A scholarship fund of $500,000 to be administered in her name, for nursing students from underprivileged backgrounds. And all contents of his personal library, including first editions worth approximately $300,000. The room erupted. Victoria screamed about lawsuits. Richard's lawyer demanded investigations. The hospital administrator looked stunned. Nia sat motionless, the words not making sense. Property. Scholarship fund? It couldn't be real. Thomas raised his voice. There's more. A personal letter, to be read only by Miss Carter. But I'll share this final recording first. He pressed play again. Alden's face reappeared, his expression softer now. Nia, if you're watching this, I'm gone. And you're probably confused, maybe overwhelmed. Let me explain. 40 years ago, when my wife Eleanor was dying, there was a nurse. She looked a lot like you, actually. Young, black, underpaid, and overworked. But she took time with Eleanor. Read to her. Held her hand during the bad nights. Made her feel seen. His voice cracked. I never thanked that nurse. Never learned her name. Spent the rest of my life regretting that I was too absorbed in my own pain, my own business, to acknowledge what she'd done. You gave me a chance to fix that regret. You showed me that kindness still exists. That some people still care more about being decent than being compensated. He looked tired but peaceful. My children learned to love money because that's all I taught them. I have only myself to blame. But you, Nia, you learned something better. Someone taught you that people matter more than profit. So I'm leaving you what I should have left to someone who actually cared. Not as payment. Not as a reward. But as an acknowledgement that what you did mattered. That feeding a dying old man, staying past your shift, showing dignity to someone everyone else had written off, that matters more than any business deal I ever closed. The video ended. Thomas closed the laptop with a soft click. The will has been validated by 3 independent attorneys, he said. All provisions are legally binding. Any challenge will be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately unsuccessful. Richard was shaking with rage. This is insane. You can't just give away a fortune to some random nurse. He can, Thomas interrupted. And he did. The question is whether you want to spend your $50,000 on lawyers trying to overturn a will you won't overturn, or accept what your father decided. Victoria turned her fury on Nia. You did this. You manipulated a dying man. You. Stop. The voice came from the hospital administrator, quiet but firm. I've reviewed the security footage from that night. Miss Carter clocked out at 9 p.m. She had every right to leave. She chose to return and sit with a patient who was alone and frightened. She didn't violate any protocol. She didn't behave inappropriately. She was, in fact, demonstrating exactly the kind of compassionate care we hope to see from our staff. The administrator looked at Richard and Victoria. Your father died with someone holding his hand, speaking kindly to him, making sure he wasn't afraid. You should be grateful for that. Instead, you're trying to punish the person who gave him comfort. Security was called. Richard and Victoria were escorted out, still threatening lawsuits that would never materialize. After everyone left, Thomas handed Nia a sealed envelope. This is the personal letter he mentioned. I was instructed to give it to you privately. Nia's hands shook as she took it. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper, her name written in Alden's trembling handwriting. I'll give you privacy, Thomas said, standing. When you're ready, call me. We have paperwork to finalize. But take your time. Alone in the quiet conference room, Nia carefully opened the envelope. Several pages, written in Alden's shaky script, some parts barely legible. Dear Nia, if you're reading this, I've died, and you've learned about the will. You're probably shocked. Maybe uncomfortable. Perhaps you're thinking you don't deserve this. Let me tell you why you do. 42 years ago, I married Eleanor Matthews. She was a teacher, brilliant and kind. I was an ambitious young developer with more plans than sense. We were happy, or I thought we were. Then I got successful. Really successful. And success became my mistress. I worked 70, 80 hours a week. Missed anniversaries. Forgot birthdays. Eleanor would say, "You're here, but you're not present." I didn't listen. Nia continued reading, tears already blurring the words. When Eleanor got sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I finally paid attention. But by then, it was too late. Too late to fix what I'd broken. Too late to be the husband she deserved. During her final months in the hospital, there was this nurse. I never got her name, which shames me to this day. She was probably about your age. She'd work her shift, then stay late with Eleanor. Read to her when Eleanor couldn't sleep. Held her hand during the pain. Made her feel like a person, not just a dying patient. I watched that nurse show my wife more tenderness in those months than I'd shown her in years. And I was jealous. Not of the nurse, but of myself. Jealous that a stranger could do what I should have been doing all along. I built an empire, Nia. But I lost what mattered. By the time Eleanor died, our children were adults who barely knew me. They knew my money, my properties, my reputation. But not me. I spent the next 40 years trying to fill the emptiness with more work. More deals. More success. It never worked. The letter continued, Alden's handwriting growing shakier. Then I got sick. And my children showed me exactly who they'd become. People I'd trained to value assets over people. When you came back that night, after your shift ended, I saw something I hadn't seen in decades. I saw someone choosing compassion over convenience. Choosing to sit with a difficult, dying old man because it was the right thing to do. You reminded me of that nurse from 40 years ago. The one who showed Eleanor dignity when she was dying. The one I never thanked. So this isn't charity, Nia. This isn't me trying to buy forgiveness or assuage guilt. This is me acknowledging truth. You deserve recognition for being the kind of person the world needs more of. The lakeside house. Eleanor and I bought it for our 50th anniversary. We were going to retire there, spend our final years together. We never got that chance. It's been empty since she died, except for my occasional visits. I want you to have it. Not because you need a house, but because it should be filled with the kind of person who would have loved Eleanor. The kind of person who sees humanity before profit. The scholarship fund is because people like you, people with compassion and skill, shouldn't have to work themselves to exhaustion just to survive. Nursing school is expensive. You know that. Help others who have your heart but not your opportunities. The final paragraph was barely legible, written in obvious pain. Nia, I don't know if there's an afterlife. But if there is, I hope I see Eleanor again. And I hope I can tell her that in my final moments, someone showed me the kindness she always believed in. Someone proved that goodness still exists. You fed me when I was hungry. You stayed when I was alone. You treated me with dignity when I deserved neither kindness nor respect. In doing so, you gave me something worth more than all my properties combined. You gave me peace. Don't feel guilty about accepting this. Don't let my children make you feel like you did something wrong. You didn't. You did everything right. Live well. Be happy. And when you're old someday, I hope someone shows you the same compassion you showed me. With gratitude and respect, Alden James Pierce. Nia sat in the empty conference room, the letter pressed against her chest, and cried. Not for the money or the property, but for an old man who died knowing someone cared. For a wife who'd been loved too late. For the strange, unexpected way kindness could echo across decades. She cried for the simplicity of what she'd done, staying late, feeding someone soup, holding a hand, and the profound impact it had created. She hadn't been trying to change anyone's life. She'd just been trying to be human. And somehow, that had been enough. The paperwork took weeks. Lawyers, notaries, property transfers, tax documents. The hospital cleared Nia of any wrongdoing and offered her a raise, a promotion. She declined both. Some things, she'd learned, weren't about advancement. Thomas Whitmore walked her through everything with patience. The lakeside property was hers, free and clear. The scholarship fund was established, with Nia as the administrator. The first edition books were being catalogued and appraised. What will you do with it all? Thomas asked one afternoon. Nia had been thinking about that question since the will reading. She'd visited the lakeside house, stood in the empty rooms that still smelled faintly of old books and loneliness. She'd imagined Eleanor and Alden young, planning a future they'd never get. I'm not keeping it as a house, she said finally. I'm turning it into something else. What? A respite center. For elderly patients who have no family. People who are dying alone, like Alden was. A place where nurses and volunteers can bring them, where they can have dignity and compassion in their final days. Thomas smiled. He would have loved that. I'll call it Eleanor's house, Nia continued. In honor of Alden's wife. The woman who believed in kindness even when the world didn't. 6 months later, Eleanor's house opened quietly. No grand ceremony, no media attention. Just a peaceful lakeside property transformed into a place of comfort. The main floor held 6 rooms, each with large windows overlooking the water. Medical equipment, yes, but also comfortable chairs, bookshelves, soft lighting. Places for families to stay if they came. Places for volunteers to sit and keep vigil if they didn't. Nia didn't quit nursing. She split her time between the hospital and Eleanor's house, training volunteers, establishing protocols, making sure every patient received the kind of care Alden had received that final night. The first patient was an elderly woman with no children, dying of heart failure. She spent her last 2 weeks looking at the lake, reading poetry, holding hands with volunteers who sat with her in shifts. She died peacefully, with someone who cared beside her. The second patient was a homeless man, found collapsed outside a shelter. He had no identification, no family anyone could locate. He spent 3 days at Eleanor's house, warm and clean and treated with dignity, before his body finally surrendered. One by one, people came. People the system had forgotten. People with no one to hold their hand. And one by one, they died knowing someone cared. Nia kept Alden's letter framed in her office. On hard days, when she was tired or discouraged, she'd read it again. Remember why this mattered. 2 years after Alden's death, Nia stood on the porch of Eleanor's house, watching sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and rose. Behind her, the house glowed with warm light. Inside, volunteers sat with patients, reading, talking, simply being present. She thought about that night in the hospital. How tired she'd been. How easy it would have been to just go home. How a simple choice, to turn around, to go back, to stay, had created ripples she never could have imagined. Alden had been right about one thing. Kindness wasn't about grand gestures. It was about small moments. A spoonful of soup. A held hand. A choice to stay when leaving would be easier. She hadn't changed the world that night. She'd just fed a dying man. But sometimes, that's exactly what changes the world. A new volunteer approached, young nursing student on a scholarship from the fund Nia administered. Miss Carter? Mr. Henderson is asking for someone to sit with him. He's scared. Nia smiled. I'll be right there. She walked back inside, back to the work that had chosen her as much as she'd chosen it. Back to rooms where dignity lived and compassion echoed and people mattered more than profit. Somewhere, she liked to think, Alden and Eleanor were watching. Somewhere, they were smiling, seeing their empty house filled with exactly what they'd always hoped for. Not silence, but connection. Not loneliness, but love. The lake reflected the fading light, and inside Eleanor's house, another hand was held, another fear was soothed, another person learned they weren't alone. And in the simplicity of that act, in the quiet dignity of presence, the legacy continued. Not because of money. Not because of property. But because one tired nurse had chosen compassion over convenience, had chosen to see a person instead of a problem, had chosen to stay when everyone else had walked away. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the greatest inheritance. Sometimes feeding someone soup changes more than just one life. Sometimes, when you treat people with dignity in their darkest moments, you create light that lasts long after they're gone. Nia understood that now. Understood that what Alden had given her wasn't really the house or the money. It was permission to believe that goodness matters. That caring counts. That in a world that often feels cold and transactional, choosing humanity is its own reward. She entered Mr. Henderson's room, pulled up a chair beside his bed, and took his trembling hand in hers. "I'm here," she said gently. "You're not alone." And in that moment, in that simple promise, Alden's gift lived on.